The Imperium had 18 Primarchs, and 8 of them broke it in half. Not because they were weak, but because Chaos figured out exactly which strengths to turn against them. Today I'm breaking down how every single Traitor Primarch fell, what was done to them, and what they did to themselves. Starting with the one who might be the most tragic of all, Magnus the Red. Magnus the Red was the smartest Primarch alive, and that's exactly why he was the easiest to destroy. Tzeentch, the Chaos God of Change, didn't need to corrupt Magnus. He just needed Magnus to keep being himself. Here's the thing, Magnus had more raw psychic power than almost any being in the galaxy. He could peer into the warp, manipulate reality, and process knowledge at a level that made his brothers look like children. But Tzeentch had been grooming him for years, engineering false victories that convinced Magnus he'd mastered the warp's dangers. Every time Magnus struck a deal with a demonic entity and walked away thinking he'd outsmarted it, Tzeentch was the one smiling. His legion, the Thousand Sons, was physically falling apart. Mutations were dissolving his warriors from the inside out, and Magnus made desperate bargains with warp entities to save them. Every solution pulled him deeper into Tzeentch's web, but here's where it gets truly painful. The Council of Nicaea banned all psychic sorcery across the Imperium. Magnus ignored it. The Emperor sent the Space Wolves to bring him back to Terra, but Horus, already corrupted, intercepted those orders. Leman Russ wasn't told to arrest Magnus. He was told to destroy him entirely. The cruelest part? In a final act of desperate loyalty, Magnus used forbidden sorcery to psychically warn the Emperor about Horus's betrayal. That single proof of loyalty shattered the Emperor's psychic defenses on Terra and condemned Magnus forever. His loyalty is what Chaos used to finish him. Forced to choose between dying on Prospera or accepting Tzeentch's salvation, Magnus accepted. He became a demon Primarch, now sitting on Sortiarius within the Eye of Terror, the most intelligent Primarch in history, and his fatal flaw was never evil. It was confidence. Tzeentch didn't have to change who Magnus was. It just waited for him to be exactly himself, at exactly the wrong moment. But if Magnus's fall was the tragedy of a brilliant mind that couldn't see its own blind spots, the next Primarch's fall was something far more brutal, because Mortarion didn't choose Chaos at all. Mortarion's story is the simplest tragedy on this entire list, and that's exactly what makes it hurt the most. He grew up on Barbarous, a toxic nightmare of a world choked in poisonous fog, ruled by an alien overlord who kept the human population as cattle. Mortarion clawed his way up from nothing, building resistance, hardening himself against the poison, becoming the one person on that entire planet strong enough to challenge the tyrant at the top. He had one goal, one thing that mattered: kill the creature that had enslaved his people. But when the Emperor arrived on Barbarous, he didn't let Mortarion finish the job. The Emperor killed the Overlord himself, robbed Mortarion of the single act of vengeance that would have validated every year of suffering he'd endured. And here's the thing, Mortarion's resentment wasn't about power or ambition. It was about acknowledgement. He needed someone to look at what he'd survived and say it mattered. The Emperor's refusal to grant him even that small victory felt less like rescue and more like a second enslavement. That wound never closed, but it also never would have destroyed him on its own. What destroyed Mortarion was Callus Typhon, his own first captain, secretly a devotee of Nurgle, who murdered the fleet's navigators while the Death Guard were en route to the siege of Terra. Typhon claimed he could guide the ships through the warp himself. He couldn't. He was lying. And that lie stranded the entire Death Guard Legion in the Immaterium with zero way out. Then the Destroyer Plague hit, and this is where it gets genuinely horrifying. The Death Guard were the toughest Space Marines ever created. Their legendary resilience, their ability to endure anything, that was their entire identity. But in the warp, that resilience became the cruelest possible curse. Their bodies bloated, their flesh rotted, organs liquefied inside them, and they could not die. They stayed fully conscious through every second of it, trapped in decaying shells that refused to stop functioning. The very thing that made them strong became their prison. Mortarion held out longer than anyone, but eventually, watching his sons scream in agony they couldn't escape, he broke. His pact with Nurgle wasn't seduction, it wasn't temptation. It was the only door left in a room with no exits. Nurgle transformed the Death Guard into Plague Marines, beings beyond pain, locked in permanent, deathless decay. The screaming stopped. The cost was everything, and here's the gut punch that makes Mortarion's story truly tragic. After the heresy, he claimed the Plague Planet in the Eye of Terror and rebuild it. Unconsciously, he shaped it into a mirror image of Barbarous, complete with toxic fog, suffering populations, and himself sitting at the top as the unchallengeable tyrant. 10,000 years later, Mortarion became the exact thing he'd spent his entire life trying to escape. But if Mortarion's fall was a tragedy of circumstance, the next Primarchs on this list made choices so strange that nobody can agree on what they actually meant. Alpharius Ommegan, every other traitor Primarch on this list has a verdict. You can point to the moment they broke, the reason they turned, and the god that claimed them. Alpharis Omegain doesn't give you that luxury. 10,000 years after the heresy, and the Warhammer community is still arguing about whether the Alpha Legion actually betrayed the Emperor or pulled off the longest, most elaborate loyalist false flag operation in galactic history. And honestly, both answers are terrifying. Here's where it gets complicated. About 2 years before the heresy kicked off, the twins encountered the Cabal, an ancient alien alliance that included Eldar Seers who claimed they'd mapped the future of the entire galaxy. Their pitch to Alpharius wasn't some demonic whisper or emotional manipulation, it was a spreadsheet of extinction. The Cabal laid out two paths. Path 1, the Emperor wins, humanity enters a golden age, but that golden age eventually collapses and chaos devours everything permanently. Path 2, Horus wins. Humanity is destroyed now, but that destruction starves chaos of its primary fuel source and kills the ruinous powers forever. The utilitarian math was horrifying but internally consistent. Sacrifice one species today to save the entire galaxy tomorrow. But here's what makes this different from every other fall on this list. Alpharius didn't join Horus out of rage like Angron. He wasn't manipulated like Magnus or broken like Mortarion. He sat down, evaluated the argument on its merits, and concluded that betraying the Emperor was what the Emperor himself would choose if he had perfect information. The Alpha Legion framed their treason as the purest form of loyalty, cold, clinical, and breathtakingly arrogant. And that arrogance is the key. The twins believed they could see what nobody else could, including their own father. They trusted alien prophets over the being who created them, not because they hated him, but because they were convinced they were smarter than everyone in the room. In practice, their rebellion caused real, measurable damage. They blockaded the White Scars from reaching Terra when the Loyalists needed every blade they could get. They seized Pluto and its moons, Charon, Kerberos, Nyx, Styx, and Hydra, and dismantled the Imperium's entire surveillance network at the worst possible moment. Real soldiers died. Real defensive positions crumbled. But unlike every other Traitor Legion, the Alpha Legion mostly avoided the wholesale demonic mutations and corruption that consumed their brothers. Whether that's because their secret loyalty to the Emperor's ideals provided some kind of spiritual insulation, or because they were simply too disciplined to fall that far, nobody knows for certain, and that's the maddening part. You can't call them traitors with confidence, and you can't call them loyalists either. They exist in the one place the 40K universe hates most, ambiguity. But if ambiguity frustrates you, the next entry will feel like a relief, because there is absolutely nothing ambiguous about Angron. Every other Traitor Primarch on this list had a moment where they could have turned back, a crossroads, a choice, a second where the path split and they picked the wrong direction. Angron never got that moment. He wasn't found as a king or a conqueror. He was found as a child, thrown into the gladiatorial pits of Nuceria, where the only rule was kill or die. Every friend he made in those arenas died beside him. Every bond he formed was severed by the same violence that created it. But here's where it gets truly horrific. When Angron defied his masters, they didn't just punish him. They hammered crude cybernetic implants called the Butcher's Nails directly into his skull, grafting them onto his cerebral cortex. These things rewired his entire emotional architecture. Joy, compassion, love, all gone, replaced with a single screaming impulse. Rage and bloodlust every waking second. The nails were also killing him through slow cortical degeneration, eating his brain piece by piece, but removing them would kill him instantly. Angron was locked inside a cage built from his own nervous system, and nobody held the key. And then the Emperor arrived. By this point, Angron had done something extraordinary. He led a slave rebellion and escaped into the mountains with tens of thousands of his arena brothers and sisters. These were the only people he had ever loved, the only beings in the universe who understood what he survived. The Emperor needed Angron for the Great Crusade, so he took his son and left the slaves to die. A father with the power of a god looked at the only people his son had ever cared about and decided they weren't worth the effort. He did later attempt to fix the nails, bringing Angron to laboratories beneath Terra where the scientists Ark and Land examined the implants. The verdict was absolute. Removal was impossible without killing him entirely. So for the entire Great Crusade, Angron served an emperor he despised while the nails screamed constantly in his mind. He didn't join Horus's rebellion because chaos seduced him. He joined because the only master he had ever truly answered to was the rage the nails forced on him, and Horus simply pointed that rage in a useful direction. After ascending to Demon Prince of Khorne, Angron became the Red Angel, a being of such catastrophic violence he could tear apart fortified bastions barehanded and physically stop titans. The Butcher's Nails didn't disappear when he ascended. They were transmuted into something permanent and immortal. Rage without end, suffering without death. The worst part? Angron never wanted any of it. He didn't want to be a warlord or a god. He just wanted his people back. And that's the one thing the entire galaxy could never give him. But if Angron's tragedy is being broken beyond repair, the next Primarch's tragedy is somehow worse, because he broke himself. Perturabo. After everything we just covered with Angron, you'd expect the next fall to involve some galaxy-shattering trauma or ancient cosmic manipulation. But Perturabo's story is almost worse because of how painfully simple it is. This is the Primarch who fell to chaos because nobody ever told him he was doing a good job. And before you laugh at that, hear me out, because it's genuinely heartbreaking. Perturabo was, by almost any measure, the greatest siege engineer the Imperium ever produced. Fortification, logistics, grinding attrition warfare, the problems nobody else wanted to touch. He was the Primarch the Emperor called when something needed to be solved, not glorified. And he solved everything, every single time. But here's where it gets complicated. Growing up on Olympia, the political courts of his homeworld taught him something brutal from childhood. Genius produces results. That's it. You don't get thanked for it. You don't get celebrated. Your accomplishments aren't impressive. They're the baseline. Your emotional needs are irrelevant. Just perform and shut up. So Perturabo internalized that framework and then spent the entire Great Crusade watching his brother Rogaldorn get showered with praise for doing what Perturabo considered inferior work. Dorn got the accolades. Dorn got the prestige assignments. Dorn was celebrated for boldness and vision, while Perturabo handled the unsexy, grinding sieges that actually held the Imperium together. The comparison festered into something pathological. This toxic cocktail of jealousy and wounded pride that he couldn't even articulate because Olympia had taught him his feelings didn't matter. And that bitterness didn't stay contained. It bled directly into the Iron Warriors themselves. His suspicion, his malevolent distrust, his callous indifference to casualties became Legion-wide traits. The Iron Warriors weren't held together by brotherhood or loyalty. They were held together by fear and iron discipline. Nothing else. Then Horus showed up and did the one thing the Emperor never bothered to do. He just acknowledged Perturabo. Directly, explicitly. He told him his achievements were remarkable. He told him his suffering was real. He told him his abilities were vital. When Horus presented Perturabo with the ancient weapon Forgebreaker as a symbol of their alliance, the hammer itself was almost beside the point. The real gift was validation. Someone with actual authority finally looked at Perturabo and said, "You deserve better." That's it. That's what flipped him. And that's what makes this fall the most avoidable one on the entire list. One genuine compliment from the Emperor. One moment of real recognition. That's all it would have taken. Instead, Perturabo got silence and Horus got a siege master. Even his ascension to Demon Prince tells the same story. After the Battle of the Iron Cage, Perturabo surrendered, captured Imperial Fist's gene seed to the Chaos Gods, and was elevated to Demon Prince of Chaos Undivided. His apotheosis, the ultimate transformation, was framed as recognition of exceptional genius. The final acknowledgement he'd spent his entire existence craving, handed to him by the worst possible source. The cruelest part? He probably knows that, and it doesn't matter, because even poison validation was better than none at all. Now, if Perturabo's fall feels uncomfortably relatable, the next one is going to feel uncomfortably seductive, because Fulgrim didn't fall for something as simple as a compliment. He fell for the promise of perfection itself. Fulgrim is the seduction story, and it's the one that should terrify you the most because it doesn't work on someone weak. It works on someone brilliant, talented, and completely aware of what perfection looks like. He should have seen it coming. That's the entire point. Fulgrim clawed his way out of slavery on Chemos through sheer exceptional ability. He was gifted beyond measure, and he knew it. But that knowledge came with a cost. Fulgrim internalized a belief that would eventually destroy him. His worth was his perfection, not his character, not his loyalty, his capacity to be flawless. He wore high collars to hide what he considered physical flaws. He measured himself obsessively against his brothers. Every interaction was a performance, and every performance had to be perfect. Here's where it gets interesting. That psychology was the exact personality profile Slaanesh needed, because the pursuit of perfection has a natural endpoint nobody talks about. You achieve everything a mortal can achieve, and then what? The hunger doesn't stop. It transforms. Perfection becomes sensation. Excellence becomes excess. And a narcissist who defines himself entirely by his achievements will chase that escalation forever. But the thing that sealed Fulgrim's fate wasn't gradual. It was a sword. When the Emperor's children conquered the lair, Fulgrim explored their most sacred temple and found a civilization dedicated entirely to sensation and pleasure. Resting at the temple's core was a silver sword with a curved blade and a crude amethyst in the pommel. The blade of the lair. It was a trap. The blade housed a greater diamond of Slaanesh. The moment Fulgrim claimed it, the demon began whispering whispering in his mind. But here's the part that makes this genuinely horrifying. The whispers aligned perfectly with Fulgrim's own darkest desires, so he thought they were his own thoughts, his own subconscious pushing him toward greatness. The demon fed him back exactly what he already wanted to hear, and he never questioned it. From there, the demon dismantled his relationship systematically. When Horus revealed his rebellion, the blade framed it as the ultimate expression of perfection. And only through chaos could humanity transcend the Emperor's false constraints, and Fulgrim believed it because he wanted to. But the Dropsite massacre is where this story becomes genuinely disturbing. Fulgrim killed Pharasmanis, his closest brother, the one person who loved him without performance or competition. And the moment Pharas fell, the fog lifted. Fulgrim saw what the blade had made him, and he tried to take his own life. The demon blocked it. It wouldn't let him die. Instead, it offered a deal: continued existence at the cost of his soul. Fulgrim, broken and desperate, accepted. The demon took full control of his body, and Fulgrim's consciousness became a prisoner inside his own flesh, watching, feeling. Unable to act, he now exists as a four-armed serpentine demon prince within the Eye of Terror. And the detail that separates Fulgrim from every other traitor on this list is that he still feels remorse. His soul is still in there, still aware, still grieving what he did to Pharasmanis, still horrified by the atrocities his body commits in Slaanesh's name. He is a prisoner serving a life sentence inside his own corrupted shell, and there is no parole. But if Fulgrim was seduced into damnation by a sword that whispered what he wanted to hear, the next Primarch didn't need a weapon or a demon. He went looking for the gods himself, Lorgar, Aurelian. Every traitor we've covered had something done to them. Magnus was tricked, Angron was broken, Mortarion was trapped. But Lorgar did the corrupting. He wasn't a victim of chaos. He was its first missionary. On Colchis, Lorgar earned the title Urizen, wisest of the wise. He wasn't a warlord at heart. He was a preacher. His core belief was simple. Humanity needed spiritual truth to thrive. So during the Great Crusade, while his brothers crushed alien empires, Lorgar built cathedrals. Every world the word-bearers brought into compliance got monuments and temples dedicated to worshipping the Emperor as a god. He genuinely thought he was doing the right thing. The Emperor disagreed violently. On the world of Kur, he ordered the Ultramarines to demolish every monument the word-bearers had built. Then he forced the entire legion to kneel in the ashes, while he told Lorgar, publicly, that his worship was unwanted and his crusade was a failure. This wasn't a private correction. It was a spectacle of shame designed to be witnessed by thousands. But here's the part that makes Lorgar different from every other humiliated Primarch. He didn't rage. He didn't spiral. He got quiet and he started asking harder questions. If the Emperor wasn't a god, then what were the beings the old faith of Colchis had worshipped? Were they real? Roughly 40 years before the heresy began, Lorgar went looking for answers. He traveled to Cadia, stood at the edge of the Eye of Terror, and walked directly into it. Not by accident, not through manipulation. He went searching for gods, and the chaos gods revealed themselves in direct, undeniable revelation. Not whispers through a cursed blade, not fever dream visions. Direct contact with entities that were, by any measurable standard, divine. Lorgar came back certain. And certainty was his fatal flaw. He became absolutely convinced that the Emperor's atheism was a deliberate lie, that the Chaos Gods were objectively real and more worthy of worship than any mortal, and that his father had betrayed humanity by suppressing this truth. In Lorgar's mind, he wasn't falling. He was waking up. But here's where it gets genuinely chilling. He didn't immediately rebel. The Word-Bearers spent the next 4 decades as secret traitors, converting to chaos while appearing loyal. Their primary objective wasn't sabotage or conquest. It was one target, Horus. Lorgar placed his agent Erebus, first chaplain of the Word-Bearers, directly next to the War Master to twist him slowly against the Emperor. They also flipped half of the Mournival, Horus's personal advisory council. By the time the heresy started, the groundwork had been laid for decades. Compare that to Magnus, who was manipulated without knowing it. Lorgar did the manipulating, knowingly, methodically, for 40 years. The tragedy isn't that Lorgar turned evil. It's that his desire to elevate humanity through spiritual truth became the exact mechanism that delivered the Imperium to ruin. He now exists as a demon prince of chaos, undivided on the demon world of Sycharis, the architect of a conspiracy whose full consequences he could never have understood. He's the scariest kind of villain, not the one who wants power, but the one completely convinced he is right. And the conspiracy he built, the agent he planted next to the War Master. That leads us directly to the man who broke the Imperium in half, Horus Lupercal. Every traitor Primarch we've covered had their own path to damnation, their own wounds, their own manipulators, their own moment where the door closed behind them. But but every single one of those paths leads back to one man. Horus Lupercal wasn't the strongest Primarch. He wasn't the most psychically gifted, but he was the most trusted. The Emperor loved Horus so completely that he invented a title just for him, War Master, Supreme Commander of all 20 Space Marine legions. The entire Great Crusade answered to Horus. No Primarch had ever held that kind of authority. And then the Emperor left. He returned to Terra, locked himself inside a laboratory, and began work on the Imperial Webway project, a secret endeavor that could have united humanity's holdings across the galaxy without reliance on the warp. But here's where it gets complicated. He never told Horus what he was doing. He never told any of his sons. He just vanished behind a sealed door and left the War Master holding the largest military machine in human history with zero explanation. Now imagine you're Horus. Your father hands you the keys to the galaxy, then walks away without a word. You're fighting his wars, managing the egos of 19 demigod brothers, and conquering entire star systems in his name, and he can't be bothered to tell you why he left. That silence activated something buried beneath the charisma and the battlefield genius. A wounded pride, a festering suspicion that the abandonment wasn't strategic but personal. None of it was true, but it didn't need to be true to be weaponizable. Lorgar had already built the gun. His agent Erebus spent years whispering to Horus, exploiting every crack in the War Master's confidence as part of a conspiracy decades in the making. And when the time came, Erebus pulled the trigger. During the compliance of Davin, Horus was mortally wounded by a corrupted governor wielding the anatheme, a Kynebrock blade Erebus himself had stolen and placed exactly where it needed to be. It was crafted specifically to corrupt mortals through wounding. With Horus dying, Erebus convinced the Warrior Lodge to bring him to the Temple of the Serpent Lodge on Davin. But what waited inside wasn't medicine. Erebus entered Horus's fevered visions and served as a proxy for the Chaos Gods themselves, who showed the War Master fabricated futures designed to confirm every fear he already carried. His father didn't trust him. His father wanted to replace him. His father had abandoned the crusade because Horus didn't matter. In exchange for healing his mortal wound, Horus accepted their offer. He chose rebellion, and just like that, the heresy was born. Horus used the one thing that made him more dangerous than any other traitor: trust. The trust 20 Primarchs had placed in him. He corrupted or coerced half of them, breaking the Imperium in two through the same quality the Emperor had loved most about him. Without Horus, there is no heresy, no civil war, no 10,000 years of darkness. Everything in the Warhammer 40,000 universe that is broken traces back to one moment in one temple on one backwater world where the War Master accepted a deal he almost certainly would have refused if anyone at all had thought to explain to him why his father had actually left. The most powerful man alive was undone by a conversation that never happened. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more, click the video on the screen now.